this is Tom, aka Gedeon, here for Star Frontiers Gamer and another Fanzine Friday, and welcome. But before we get to Frontier Explorer number 32, which is an exciting issue, we have a word from our sponsor. Now, first up, we are looking at Frontier Explorer number 32. I love this cover. Jay Thurman did these orthos, these Starship orthos for the Frontier, for the Assault Scout and some Frontier freighters, and gave us permission to use them. And I just really appreciate that. So this is cover we put together with his Assault Scout, ortho that he worked up, and I just want to, do a little shout out to Jay. Thank you for your work in supporting the Frontier. This issue, we're gonna move right along. We've got this article called "Playing the Bad Guys," and this is a blast from the past article. This is no longer available on the web, but I found it in the Wayback Machine, and it was a story by Albin Johnson. And this was a story of a Star Frontiers game. It's only a one-page read here. It's his regular group. They had been playing all through high school. They went off to college. And this is when they got back together one time after having gone off to college and going separate ways and play. As this was really a fun story, and I thought this story needs to be preserved because it's no longer available on the web. And so we reprinted it here. I could not actually get permission from him ahead of time, so we actually did it without getting his permission. But it's a great story, well worth reading. And so Bad Guys, playing the bad guys. Next up is Frag Maps. Frag Maps, he does these great sci-fi maps. And so I highly encourage you to check out his Patreon and support his Patreon. And you'll get access to just numerous sci-fi maps that he does. And he's very responsive. You get on his Discord, you can send him messages, and he's very, very responsive. Great guy. So I was doing a review of the Frag Maps here, and I promoted the use of this particular one map for the Crash on Volturnus thing there, where you're in the escape pod or the lifeboat, and the lifeboat crashes in the Crash on Volturnus module. And then next up, great article by Jerry Boucher, and with his own artwork called "Have Air Car Will Travel." And so he's promoting several different types of air cars in here. Like, I love these air bike, racing air bike. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to these air plats and the compact air plat. I thought these were fantastic because to just work into an adventure, this is the kind of thing that a Yazarian PC will just hop overboard and glide down into, a situation. And so I just thought these were fantastic because they would promote the players or even NPCs doing oddball things, not normal, something a little bit different. And then up next, another article on vehicles. This is Zoomers by Oscar Rios, and this was your dual rotor helicopters. And so he was writing a whole article on that, very much inspired, I think, by the dual rotor helicopters from Avatar. And so Jerry did more artwork for us for this particular article. So great illustrations. Now, every once in a while, you come across an illustration and it inspires you to write something. And this was an Aaron O'Brien illustration from that Creature Codex that was in a few issues back. And he had diced on that Creature Codex, and he came up with the prompts, Old Versk Thief. And he drew this picture of an old Versk picking somebody's pockets. And he's old because he's using the exoskeleton because he's become infirm. And so that was how he communicated the infirmity of this Versk being old. I just love this illustration, and it led me to write this article on the Versk hustler archetype. And there are two basic character concepts here: the card sharp / card shark. The original term was, I did not know until I wrote this, card sharp. But in America, in my experience, it's been the card shark. So I embraced both in the character concept. And then there was the confidence bug, the confidence man who would just kind of convince you to do something you wouldn't normally do. And so this was leveraging the verse comprehension ability to read a social situation or read somebody, spot their tell, figure out how to manipulate the situation. And then also in this article, you get some new equipment, because if you're doing a verse criminal, you're going to need lockpicks. You're going to need some of these other little gadgets and doodads for playing the character. And then next up, we have a radiation hazards in the frontier. Part 1, this is getting the Joseph Kabadass treatment of thoroughness. And so it's a part 1, part 2. But I also want to draw your attention to Star Frontiersman 17. This is where I had taken radiation sickness and wrote a mechanic for using it in Star Frontiers. But I wrote the mechanic in the very same formula that Star Frontiers uses for infections, for poisons, and for diseases. And so it matches that. And, so it was written to match that. Now, Joseph's actually going quite a bit beyond what I did with his article. And I think where he does these radiation symptoms, he's borrowing a little bit of ideas that I used, but he's going quite a bit further. There's new drugs added to this. There's new injectable drugs added to this article. So this is really a much more thorough article than I did, but I referenced the Star Frontiersman 17 for the original article if you're interested. And we have Titan Rising comic in the center. And then we have another blast from the past article. This is material written. I don't know who wrote it. I found it on the Frontier News Network in the Wayback Machine Internet Archive. This is introducing alien technology flowcharts. And what this is really doing is you use these flowcharts for a character trying to figure out alien technology. So you'll roll, and then depending on the roll, you'll go to a different spot on the flow charts, make another ability check, logic check, skill roll, and move through this flow chart to figure out so it made figuring out alien technology kind of a skill challenge. And I thought this was really fantastic. And this was information that really needed to be preserved. So this is a way to turn figuring out an alien technology into a whole skill challenge for the players. And this was really worth saving. So that is the alien technology flowcharts. The next article, and this was one of those, it's about damn time somebody did this articles. Oscar Rios did us a major service with this one. It is called An Industrious Life. And it is about exploring the verse culture It's a look at the life of the average Versk. And so this explores verse culture from a number of perspectives. And it's a very thorough article. I wholeheartedly embrace this cultural article. We've had many of these articles for Drolocytes, for Eusarians. This was about time somebody did this one. So thank you, Oscar, for that. Next up is the IR masking skein suit and the military issue toxi-rad gauge. My brother had told me this story of an experience he had in the Army in Korea, where he basically had to tell his lieutenant to go fornicate with himself. And he did it in not so many words and was more polite about it because, you know, it was a lieutenant. But it was a lieutenant who had his head up his butt. And so it inspired me to write this story. These are ground fleet troops who have an encounter with a Versk squad during, war, probably the Second South Ar War. And so it was really inspired by this experience that my brother had that he told me about. And so I used it as a kernel for writing this little piece of fiction and then introducing the infrared masking skein suit and the military issue toxi-rad gauge, because there is, I consider, a problem with the toxi-rad gauge as it is written. As it is written, the toxi-rad gauge is just fine for civilian use, but in military use, the way it is written, the way it operates, I think would be problematic, and that's illustrated in this story. So this is just one of those in the Minzy marketplace, introducing two new pieces of equipment that I think are kind of cool, kind of interesting, and a little piece of fiction that I enjoyed writing. This next article is the expanded med kit. And the med kit in Star Frontiers is kind of one size fits all. And so we kind of introduce different levels of med kits for maybe a first responder. I introduce a pharma fanny pack where it's just an extra fanny pack loaded with extra doses of injectable drugs. And as well as that, all these extra med kits giving you different levels of equipment here that you might choose. You might not want the heavy, full-on doctor's surgical kind of med kit. You might just be a first responder, wants to be able to do some quick first aid, stabilize a patient, and get them to the hospital. So you might want a lighter med kit. But this pharma fanny pack, I also included here a catalog of every injectable med that had been created for Star Frontiers to this point, with the exception of the radiation meds, I believe, that are in Joseph's article on radiation sickness. So this was a great resource to this point, but there is a new catalog of injectable pharmaceuticals for Star Frontiers, and that was included in the medical theme article from the Star Frontiers, the recent Star Frontiersman Volume 2, where we did a medical theme and we updated that. So you might consider going there for your catalog of all the pharmaceuticals that have been invented so far for Star Frontiers. And another blast from the past, recovered from the Internet Archive, Star Buckaroos. This was invented by Andrew Campbell. And, it was just somewhere I actually have a deck of these printed on business cards. And it was just for playing a card game in-game, to have a kind of a challenge for the players versus an NPC. And I just thought this was fantastic and really ought to be preserved. So we rescued this from the lost internet and republished it here. And then finally, the really jewel of an article in this particular issue is Soaring to New Heights of Adventure on Hakosor. And Hakosor is in the Skrifron system. And this is basically compiling all of the information on Skrifron that was available. And so as we went through this, you have the astrographic tables from Alpha Dawn, which differ in some details from those from Zebulon's Guide. So I republish the information from both. There's discussions here on reconciling the details between Alpha Dawn and Zeb's Guide. And I basically took the position of it's a difference in time. The difference in the tables is really just a difference in time. And I do some musings on the history of Screfron. And then I wrote up places of interest. Now, some of these are canon and some of these I invented. For example, this Histran base, it's a joint UPF base. It's kind of the same idea that the United States military is doing, where they do these joint bases. So you might have a Navy officer commanding, but you've got some U.S. Air Force assets there, U.S. Army, U.S. Marines, and they call it a joint base. And it was that kind of idea where you would have some space fleet, ground fleet. There could be Star Law, a Star Law contingent there. There could be medical services organization. I actually wrote that in after the Blue Plague, came through the frontier. They established a major medical services organization lab there. So you could have player characters from all of these different services working as like a joint team. Based out of Histran base. We invented Eco's Landing, which is a civilian field, because you're not going to get civilian freighters landing at the military base. So you have a nice little civilian base here with a civilian landing strip. And of course bars. That it supports the. There's bars and entertainment there for the military personnel to leave the base and go to Eco's Landing, and a little bit of trade goes on. Some of these Yazarian monasteries. Now I want to point out what's not in here was I was writing an adventure involving a Yazarian monastery. It's one of these monasteries positioned here on the planet Histran. And I was inspired originally by some artwork. And this is by Dyson Logos. Some of you are familiar with him. Dyson Logos, Dyson's Dodecahedron is, I believe, his blog. And this is an actual real-world monastery from India, I think. It's maybe a Buddhist monastery. And at the same time, I discovered Dyson's artwork. I've also discovered somebody had done a Photoshop paint of the real world monastery with a waterfall attached to it. And so I had asked that person if I could use their artwork, and they said, yeah, sure, as long as your RPG adventure doesn't have any violence in it. Which I was like, well, forget it. I'm not gonna live within that stipulation, because it's an RPG and it's Star Frontiers and there's bound to be violence, right? But Dyson's artwork here is absolutely fantastic. And then he also did, because that's what Dyson does, is maps, is he did this little map showing how you would go through it. Now, it's a very linear looking adventure. And so these maps are on his blog, and I pointed out you should go check that out. But one thing, despite the fact that this is very linear, a Star Frontiers adventure, I would allow most player characters to attempt to do a jump across this waterfall here and land on one of these little roofs over here. A Yazarian character would not have to roll. He could just glide, but any of the other characters could make an ability check to make that jump and land on one of these roofs over here from one of these little. So you could, that way it's not quite so linear. They're not forced into the linear railroad of this. But I just point this out because I thought this inspired me to write an adventure. And I got a half-written adventure somewhere. I should dust it off and maybe write it up and put it in the magazine here. But this is fantastic. And then Dyson had this Photoshop that I think he did, very similar to the other Photoshop that I found. But again, this is not the actual real world monastery here per se. So that resource is there for you if you want to run an adventure on one of these Yazarian monasteries. This article ends with Adventures in Screefron, and so I wrote some ideas here. You've got this Mechnon angle, and I kind of wrote 3 different encounters, adventure ideas involving Mechnons, with the player characters being operators based out of Histran base. You'd be able to run a whole mini campaign. Maybe at some point they go visit one of those monasteries. You could run an adventure there as well. And you could do this whole mini Mechnon angle here. But again, this would be the Mechnons after they've established the planet Meccano. After they have emigrated from Volturnus. You've already had the Mechnon revolt on Volturnus, and now they're actually seeking, at one point, admission to the UPF. And so, one of these encounters talks about, there's a Mechnon delegation being sent to the UPF, to the Council of Worlds, to petition admission, as we see in the Zeb's timeline. So there's a whole potential for a mini campaign here that you could run right out of this star system. And then lastly, in this particular issue is, I forgot about this. This is reaping new Star Frontiers miniatures from Reaper. That would be the manufacturer, Reaper Miniatures. And in their Chronoscope line, there are some very Star Frontiers looking miniatures here. Now, one of these, I actually cut the head off and sculpted a Drollicite head onto. And so you see him here. But I love the Drollicite in the spacesuit, and you get a very, very Yazarian looking miniature. He is very Yazarian. The Corcosan. So these are great little miniatures to add to your collection if you game with miniatures. And then finally, another Escape Plan comic on the back. Let you read that for yourself. So this is Frontier Explorer number 32. Great issue, lots of equipment, lots of vehicles in here, gadgets and equipments for your player characters to play with, and then a whole review of the Screefron system, giving it the treatment to make it more accessible for running adventures there, and even a suggested little mini campaign that you can develop. So this is Tom signing out for the Star Frontiers Gamer and Tabletop Tap Room with another Fanzine Friday reviewing Frontier Explorer number 32. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my subscribers. You guys are great. And I will see you in the Frontier.